May 1941. Adolf Hitler stood in the map room of the Reich Chancellery staring at a model of the Bismarck. 50,000 tons of steel. The most powerful battleship Germany had ever built. 8 15-inch guns. Armor thick enough to shrug off anything the British could throw at it. He called it unsinkable. In 3 days, it would be at the bottom of the Atlantic, and the words he spoke when he learned of its destruction would echo through the remaining 4 years of the war. But first, it had to sail. May 18, 1941. Bismarck sails. The Bismarck slipped out of Gotenhafen harbor on May 18, 1941, its gray hull cutting through the Baltic like a blade. On the bridge, Admiral Lütjens watched the coastline fade. 57 years old, iron-faced, he'd been given command of Operation Rheinübung, breakout into the Atlantic to savage British convoy routes. The heavy cruiser Prinz Eugen accompanied them. Together, they would show the Royal Navy what German engineering could do. Lütjens had reservations. The Bismarck was powerful, yes, but it was also alone. The Tirpitz, Bismarck's sister ship, wasn't ready. The Scharnhorst and Gneisenau were under repair. The sortie would put Germany's newest, most expensive battleship into the North Atlantic with minimal support, facing the entire British home fleet. Lütjens had argued for delay. Hitler had overruled him. The Führer wanted results. The U-boats were strangling Britain, but slowly. A surface raider, a symbol of German might smashing British cruisers and sinking merchant ships by the dozen. That would break British morale. That would show the world Germany controlled the seas. So Bismarck sailed north through the Norwegian fjords, refueling at Bergen. British reconnaissance aircraft spotted them there on May 21st. The Royal Navy began moving pieces into position. The hunt begins. Admiral John Tovey, commanding the home fleet from HMS King George V, ordered every available ship to intercept. The battle cruiser Hood, pride of the Royal Navy, steamed toward the Denmark Strait with the new battleship Prince of Wales cruisers spread out in a search line. This wasn't going to be a commerce raid. This was going to be a hunt. May 23rd, spotted May 23rd, evening. The cruiser HMS Suffolk picked up Bismarck on radar in the Denmark Strait, the narrow passage between Iceland and Greenland. Lütjens knew he'd been spotted. He could turn back, abort the mission, return to Germany with nothing accomplished. Or he could push through, trust in Bismarck's guns and armor to smash whatever the British threw at him, break into the open Atlantic where convoys waited like sheep. He pushed through. May 24th, 5:52 a.m., Hood appears. May 24th, 5:52 a.m. The Hood appeared on the horizon, its massive silhouette unmistakable even in the gray dawn light. Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland commanded from Hood's bridge. Behind him came Prince of Wales. 2 capital ships against 2. Holland ordered an approach that would close the range quickly, bring all guns to bear. His crew had trained for this. Hood had been the largest warship in the world for 20 years, the symbol of British naval supremacy. 1,400 men crewed it. Most of them were about to die. 5:53 a.m. The Battle of the Denmark Strait, 5:53 a.m. Hood opened fire at 25,000 yards. Massive shells arced through the air. Bismarck's guns answered. The sea erupted in towering columns of water as shells fell short, straddling the targets. The range closed. 20,000 yards, 18,000. Hood's 5th salvo landed near Bismarck. Prinz Eugen's shell struck Hood, starting a fire. Then Bismarck's fifth salvo hit. One shell, possibly two, penetrated Hood's deck armor. The explosion that followed was visible for miles. A column of flame shot 1,000 feet into the air. Hood's back broke. The bow rose, the stern rose, the middle simply vanished in fire and smoke. 3 minutes after the fatal hit, Hood was gone. 1,415 men went down with it. 3 survived. The celebration on Bismarck's bridge, the crew cheered. They just sunk the pride of the Royal Navy in less than 10 minutes. Lütjens allowed himself a thin smile. The British would be reeling. Prince of Wales, still working up its crew, turned away under fire, hit multiple times. The way to the Atlantic was open, except Bismarck was leaking oil. The problem Prince of Wales had landed 3 hits before turning away. One shell had penetrated the forward hull, rupturing fuel tanks. A slick of oil trailed behind them in the water. Not critical damage, but enough to leave a trail, enough to limit their range, enough to make Lütjens reconsider. He detached Prinz Eugen, sent it south to raid independently. Bismarck would make for the French coast, for the port of Brest, for repairs. They'd accomplished something. They'd sunk the Hood. That would have to be enough. The British didn't agree. Sink the Bismarck. Churchill, when he learned of Hood's destruction, said 3 words: sink the Bismarck. Every ship, every aircraft, every resource the Royal Navy could muster converged on the North Atlantic. Tovey pushed King George V to maximum speed. The aircraft carrier, victorious, launched Swordfish torpedo bombers. The battleship Rodney, escorting a convoy, abandoned its charges and turned toward the hunt. Cruisers maintained radar contact, shadowing Bismarck through the night. May 24th, 11 p.m., first air attack. May 24th, 11 p.m. 9 Swordfish from Victorious found Bismarck in failing light. Obsolete biplanes, fabric-covered, barely faster than a car on a highway. They wobbled through heavy anti-aircraft fire. One torpedo struck Bismarck amidships. Minimal damage, but it rattled Lütjens. The British knew exactly where he was. They weren't giving up. May 25th, 3 a.m., lost contact. May 25th, 3 a.m., Bismarck broke contact. A sharp turn, radio silence, and suddenly the British lost their radar lock. For 31 hours, they searched, ships crisscrossing the ocean, burning fuel, finding nothing. Lütjens thought he'd escaped. He broke radio silent to send a long transmission to Germany, reporting the action, requesting air cover when he approached the French coast. British direction finding stations triangulated the transmission. They had him again. The desperate pursuit. But the pursuit was becoming desperate. King George V was running low on fuel. Rodney was at extreme range. If Bismarck reached French waters, German U-boats and aircraft would protect it. The window was closing. May 26th, 10:30 a.m., spotted again. May 26th, 10:30 a.m., a Catalina flying boat spotted Bismarck, 690 miles from Brest. Still too far. The only British ships close enough to intercept were Force H coming up from Gibraltar, the aircraft carrier Ark Royal, with the battle cruiser Renown and cruiser Sheffield. Tovey ordered Ark Royal to launch everything they had. The failed attack, 3 p.m., 15 Swordfish took off from Ark Royal's pitching deck. The weather was deteriorating, heavy seas, low clouds. They found a ship on radar, attacked through the murk. Their torpedoes missed. They'd attacked Sheffield by mistake. their own cruiser. They returned to Ark Royal, rearmed, and took off again at 7 p.m. This time, they'd make sure of their target. 8:47 p.m. The fatal hit. The second strike found Bismarck at 8:47 p.m. 13 Swordfish flying at wave height, anti-aircraft fire filling the air around them. Bismarck turned hard, trying to avoid the torpedoes. Most missed. 2 hit. One struck amidships, negligible damage. The second hit the stern. The rudder jammed 40 degrees to port, locked in place. Bismarck began turning in circles, unable to steer, unable to run. Engineers tried to free the rudder, failed. Tried to rig emergency steering, failed. The ship was crippled, 400 miles from safety, with the entire British home fleet closing in. Lütjens' final message. Lütjens sent a final message to Germany. Ship unmaneuverable. We will fight to the last shell. Long live the Führer. In Berlin, Admiral Erich Raeder received the message at midnight. He'd been Marine Oberkommando since 1928, architect of Germany's surface fleet, advocate for battleship construction against Hitler's preference for U-boats. The Bismarck was his vindication, proof that capital ships still mattered. And now it was trapped, crippled, doomed, he had to tell Hitler. The meeting. He found the Führer in his study, reviewing maps of the Eastern Front. Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, was scheduled for June. Hitler was consumed with planning, with a massive redeployment of forces, with the grandest military operation in history. Raeder's news shattered his concentration. According to Raeder's later account, Hitler's face went white. He stood, knocking papers from his desk. The Bismarck, he said, crippled. How? Raeder explained. The torpedo hit, the jammed rudder, the British closing in. Hitler's voice rose. You told me it was unsinkable. You told me British ships couldn't match it. You told me this operation would succeed. Raeder had no answer. Hitler paced, hands clasped behind his back, the way he did when controlling fury. Can we save it? He asked. U-boats? Aircraft? Raeder shook his head. Too far from land. The weather was too poor for effective air support. U-boats were moving to intercept, but they wouldn't arrive in time. The Bismarck would have to fight alone. Hitler's verdict. Hitler stopped pacing. He turned to Raeder. Then it will sink, he said quietly, and when it does, Admiral, you will explain to me why I should ever trust the surface fleet again. May 27th, dawn. May 27th, dawn. Bismarck wallowed in heavy seas, still turning in slow circles, unable to steer. The crew was exhausted. They'd been at action stations for 3 days. They knew what was coming. At 8:43 a.m., HMS Rodney and King George V appeared on the horizon. Behind them came cruisers, Dorsetshire and Norfolk. Bismarck was surrounded. 8:47 a.m., the final battle begins. 8:47 a.m. Rodney opened fire with its 16-inch guns. King George V joined in. Bismarck's guns answered. The first salvos were accurate, straddling the British ships. Then Rodney's third salvo struck Bismarck's forward turrets. Anton turret was destroyed. Bruno turret was disabled. Bismarck's main armament was halved in minutes. The British ships closed to point-blank range. 3,000 yards. Impossible to miss. They poured shells into Bismarck's superstructure. The bridge was hit, killing most of the command staff. Lütjens died there. Still at his post, Captain Ernst Lindemann, Bismarck's commander, died shortly after the ship was a burning wreck, its guns silent. But it wouldn't sink. The problem. The armor belt held. British shells couldn't penetrate deep enough to reach the magazines, the engine rooms, the vital spaces below the waterline. 10:15 a.m. Tovey, watching from King George V, was running out of fuel. He'd expended 700 shells. Rodney had fired nearly 400. Bismarck was a flaming hulk, clearly finished, but still afloat. He ordered the cruiser Dorsetshire to finish it with torpedoes. The scuttling on Bismarck, the surviving crew made their choice. They'd fought until their guns were silent, until their ship was unrecognizable. They wouldn't let the British take it as a prize. Engineering parties went below, opened the seacocks, set scuttling charges. The sea poured in. 10:36 a.m. Dorsetshire fired 3 torpedoes. 2 hit, but Bismarck was already sinking from the scuttling charges. The bow went down first. The stern rose, propellers spinning in the air. Men jumped into the freezing water, clinging to debris. Dorsetshire and other ships moved in to pick up survivors. Then a U-boat alarm. False, as it turned out. But the British ships fled, leaving hundreds of German sailors in the water. Of 2,200 crew, only 110 were rescued. The rest drowned or died of exposure in the next hours. Bismarck slipped beneath the waves at 10:40 a.m., 3 days after sinking the Hood. The news reaches Berlin. The news reached Berlin that afternoon. Raeder brought it to Hitler personally. The Führer was in a meeting with his army chiefs, planning Barbarossa. Raeder waited until the meeting ended, then delivered the report. Bismarck had been sunk. Over 2,000 men lost. The British were celebrating. Churchill had addressed Parliament, praising the Royal Navy's victory. Hitler listened without expression. When Raeder finished, he was silent for a long moment. Hitler's words dust. Then he spoke, his voice cold and precise. The surface fleet is a waste of resources. Every ton of steel in those ships could have built tanks. Every man crewing them could have fought in Russia. The British have 100 ships for every one of ours. They will always have more. They will always win. Raeder tried to argue. One loss didn't invalidate the entire strategy. The Tirpitz was nearly ready. The Scharnhorst and Gneisenau would be repaired. They could still threaten British convoys, tie down Royal Navy resources. Hitler cut him off. The new strategy, no more offensive operations, he said. The big ships will stay in port. They will threaten, but they will not sail. Let the British worry about them. Let them keep ships in home waters, guarding against raids that will never come. But I will not lose another capital ship in a pointless gesture. The aftermath, it wasn't quite the end of the German surface fleet. Tirpitz would sortie occasionally, menacing Arctic convoys. Scharnhorst would sink in 1943 trying to attack a convoy, but Hitler's words that day marked a fundamental shift. After Bismarck, the Kriegsmarine's big ships became a fleet in being, a threat that never materialized, assets that consumed resources without delivering results. The U-boat arm, by contrast, received everything: more boats, more men, more support. Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, became Hitler's favored naval officer. When Raeder resigned in 1943, Dönitz replaced him as commander-in-chief. The strategy that nearly starved Britain into submission, the wolf packs that sank millions of tons of shipping, that was Hitler's preferred naval warfare. Not grand battleships dueling on the surface, but submarines striking from below. The deeper anger. But there was more to Hitler's reaction than strategic calculation. Those who were present in the days after Bismarck's sinking reported a deeper anger, a personal fury. He'd invested enormous resources in the ship, approved its construction over objections about cost and time. He'd overruled Lütjens' concerns about sailing without support. He'd believed Raeder's assurances that Bismarck was superior to anything the British could field, and in 3 days it had been hunted down and destroyed. Hitler hated being wrong. He hated being embarrassed. The sinking of the Hood had been trumpeted in German propaganda as proof of German superiority. Newsreels showed Bismarck sailing out, invincible, unstoppable. Now, those same newsreels had to be pulled. The story had to be rewritten. Bismarck had fought heroically against overwhelming odds, a tragic loss but a moral victory. The propaganda ministry worked overtime to spin the disaster. But Hitler knew the truth. The truth Germany had lost its newest, most powerful battleship on its first operation. The British had demonstrated that they could hunt down and sink any German surface ship, no matter how powerful, if they committed enough resources. The Atlantic wasn't Germany's to raid. It was Britain's to defend, and they would defend it with everything they had. In private conversations over the following weeks, Hitler returned to the subject repeatedly. He questioned Raeder about every decision, every tactical choice Lütjens had made. Why hadn't they turned back when spotted? Why hadn't they finished off Prince of Wales? Why hadn't they shaken the pursuit? Raeder had no good answers. Lütjens had made reasonable choices with the information he had. The British had simply been better, luckier, more determined. What Hitler couldn't accept, that was what Hitler couldn't accept. The idea that the British were better, that German technology, German training, German will could be defeated by an enemy he'd been taught to see as decadent, weak, past their prime. The Royal Navy had been ruling the seas for centuries, but this was supposed to be Germany's century. The Bismarck was supposed to prove that. Instead, it proved the opposite. It proved that Britain's Navy, for all its old ships and outdated doctrines, still knew how to fight. It proved that aircraft carriers, not battleships, were the future of naval warfare. Those obsolete Swordfish biplanes flying at barely 100 miles per hour had crippled the most modern battleship in the world. The lesson was clear, but Hitler refused to learn it. Instead of investing in carriers, he abandoned surface warfare almost entirely. The model? There's a story, possibly apocryphal, that circulated among Hitler's staff after the sinking. He'd been looking at the model of the Bismarck in his map room, the one he'd shown to visitors with such pride. An aide found him there late at night, just standing, staring at it. The aide asked if he wanted the model removed. Hitler shook his head. "Leave it," he supposedly said. "Let it remind me that the sea belongs to the British. We will win this war on land, whether that conversation happened or not." The sentiment was real. The Eastern Front. After May 27th, 1941, Hitler's focus turned almost entirely to the Eastern Front. The invasion of the Soviet Union began 5 weeks later. The vast tank battles, the sieges, the brutal infantry combat, that was warfare Hitler understood. Ships were abstractions, distant pieces on a map he couldn't control. Armies were real. Armies he could command directly, could see results from, could bend to his will. The Bismarck's loss reinforced every instinct Hitler had about naval warfare. It was unpredictable. It was dependent on weather, luck, technology he didn't fully understand. It put Germany's most expensive weapons at the mercy of the British, who had more ships, more experience, more ability to replace losses. Better to fight where Germany was strong, on land, with tanks and artillery and infantry. Raiders fall. Raeder never recovered Hitler's trust. Their meetings became tense, adversarial. Hitler questioned every proposal, every request for resources. When Raeder suggested building aircraft carriers, Hitler laughed. With what steel? With what shipyards? With what time? The British have 6 carriers in service and more building. We would finish our first carrier in 1944, if ever, and by then the war will be decided on land, in Russia. The final break came in December 1942, the Battle of the Barents Sea, where German destroyers and cruisers failed to destroy a British convoy, despite superior forces. Hitler erupted. He ordered all major surface ships decommissioned, their guns removed and installed in coastal fortifications, their crews transferred to U-boats. Raeder resigned in protest. Dönitz took over, convinced Hitler to keep the big ships in commission, but they rarely sailed again. Back to that day. May 27, 1941, when the news first arrived. Hitler's immediate reaction, before the strategic calculations, before the recriminations, was simpler. He'd lost. The British had won. The ship he'd called unsinkable was at the bottom of the Atlantic, and the words he'd used to describe it, the confidence he'd projected, the assurances he'd given, all of it was proven hollow in 3 days of hunting and 1 morning of destruction. How? He'd asked Raeder, how did this happen? As if there should have been some way to prevent it, some decision that would have changed the outcome. But there wasn't. The inevitability. The moment Bismarck sailed into the Denmark Strait, the moment it sank the hood and announced its presence, the Royal Navy was never going to stop hunting. They would have pursued it to the Arctic, to the South Atlantic, to the Indian Ocean if necessary. You don't sink the pride of the fleet and sail away. The British weren't going to allow that. Lütjens had known this. His final message, "We will fight to the last shell," wasn't defiance. It was acceptance. He'd known from the moment that torpedo jammed the rudder that Bismarck was doomed. He'd known his crew was doomed. He stayed on the bridge and went down with his ship because there was nothing else to do. What Hitler never understood that kind of fatalism. He believed in will, in determination, in refusing to accept defeat. The idea that sometimes you're simply beaten, that sometimes the enemy is stronger or luckier or better positioned, that was foreign to him. There had to be someone to blame, some failure to identify and punish. But there was no one to blame. Lütjens had followed his orders, Lindemann had commanded his ship well. The crew had fought with courage and skill. The British had simply been better. They'd used radar effectively, coordinated multiple forces, adapted when they lost contact, and ultimately landed the lucky hit that doomed Bismarck. Warfare is like that sometimes. You can do everything right and still lose. The lesson Hitler never accepted. Hitler never accepted that lesson. He spent the rest of the war looking for ways to guarantee victory, to remove uncertainty, to impose his will on reality. It's why he micromanaged operations, overruled his generals, insisted on holding every inch of ground even when retreat was the only sensible option. The Bismarck's loss taught him that the world was unpredictable and uncontrollable. His response was to try to control it even more rigidly. The irony is that Bismarck's sortie did accomplish something, just not what Hitler wanted. It tied down enormous British resources. Over 100 ships were involved in the hunt. Fuel, ammunition, time, all expended to sink one battleship. If Germany had continued aggressive surface operations, if they'd risked their big ships regularly, they might have forced Britain to keep even more resources in home waters, away from the Mediterranean, away from convoy escort duties. But Hitler's reaction prevented that. After Bismarck, the German surface fleet became passive, defensive, a wasting asset. The Tirpitz sat in Norwegian fjords, occasionally menaced, but rarely sailed. British carriers and battleships had to watch it true, but they weren't chasing it across the Atlantic, weren't burning fuel and ammunition hunting it down. The threat was manageable. What might have been? If Hitler had said, "We lost one ship, we'll build more, we'll keep trying," the naval war might have been different. Instead, he said, "Never again," and the Kriegsmarine surface fleet became irrelevant. The real reaction that was Hitler's real reaction to the Bismarck sinking, not just anger at the loss, but a fundamental rejection of the entire strategy. He'd gambled on a surface raider breaking into the Atlantic and savaging convoys. The gamble had failed spectacularly. His response was to never gamble that way again. Stick to U-boats, stick to land warfare, stick to what he understood and could control. 3 days. 3 days. That's all it took to change Hitler's entire naval strategy. 3 days from the Hood's destruction to Bismarck's sinking. 3 days that showed the limits of German naval power and the enduring strength of the Royal Navy. 3 days that Hitler never forgot. That shaped his decisions for the rest of the war. The wreck. The Bismarck lies 3 miles down in the Atlantic now, broken in half, its guns silent, its crew still entombed in the wreckage. It's been visited by explorers, photographed, documented. The swastikas on the stern were still visible in early expeditions, though the sea is slowly claiming everything. Hitler never visited the ocean. He was afraid of water, uncomfortable on ships, preferred mountains and forests. The sea was alien to him, and after the Bismarck, it remained that way. He left naval warfare to his admirals and focused on the land campaigns that eventually destroyed Germany. The confrontation. But on May 27th, 1941, for a few hours, he had to confront what naval warfare meant. The risk, the uncertainty, the possibility of catastrophic loss despite technological superiority. And his response, his words to Raeder, his decisions in the following weeks, they echo through the rest of the war. The surface fleet would never again threaten the Atlantic. The U-boats would carry the burden of the naval war, and they would ultimately fail too. Hitler would turn his full attention to the Eastern Front, to the land war that consumed everything, that ended with Soviet tanks in Berlin and Hitler dead in his bunker, the Trace. All of that, in some small way, traces back to 3 days in May 1941, when the British hunted down and sank the Bismarck, and Hitler learned that some things, no matter how powerful, no matter how advanced, can still be beaten by an enemy with enough determination and a little bit of luck. That was the lesson of the Bismarck. Hitler learned it, but he never accepted it, and that made all the difference. Conclusion: if this story of pride, hubris, and the brutal reality of naval warfare has captivated you, subscribe to Frontline America. Cash. World War II right now. Hit that like button and share this with anyone who wants to understand how 3 days in May 1941 changed Hitler's entire naval strategy. Drop a comment. Do you think Hitler was right to abandon the surface fleet after Bismarck? And where in the world are you watching from? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.